The night my family told me I was nothing but a burden, they made one mistake. They forgot that the woman they were throwing away had already been given the one thing they could never take back. A reason to fight. I was 24 when my mother placed an old suitcase beside my feet and said, "You can't stay here anymore." I remember staring at her because, for several seconds, I honestly thought she was joking. It was nearly midnight. The house was quiet except for the ticking clock above the kitchen doorway and the rain tapping against the windows. My older brother, Daniel, was sitting at the table with his arms crossed. My father stood behind him. Neither of them looked surprised. That was when I understood. This wasn't an argument. It was a decision. My name is Emily Carter, and for the previous 3 years I had been taking care of my grandfather. He had suffered a stroke that left the left side of his body weak. He couldn't walk without help, couldn't prepare his own meals, and sometimes forgot what day it was. But he never forgot me. Every morning he would look at me over his glasses and say the same thing. "Don't waste your life making everyone else comfortable." I always laughed. I thought it was just something old people said when they were afraid for you. I didn't know those words would eventually become the foundation of my entire life. That night, my mother pointed toward the suitcase. "Your brother needs the downstairs room." I looked at Daniel. "The downstairs room?" He shrugged. "I need space." I stared at him. "That room is where Grandpa sleeps." My mother's face tightened. "We'll move him upstairs." "He can't climb stairs." "We'll figure something out." I looked at my father. "Dad?" He finally raised his eyes. "Your mother thinks this is best." That sentence destroyed something inside me. Not because he agreed. Because he didn't even bother pretending to disagree. I had spent 3 years washing Grandpa's clothes, managing his medications, driving him to appointments, preparing his meals, and sitting beside him during the nights when he couldn't sleep. Daniel had barely entered his room. Yet somehow I was the problem. My mother sighed. "You're young, Emily. You need to start living your own life." I looked at the suitcase. "You're asking me to leave because Daniel wants my room?" "No," she said. "Then why?" She hesitated. "Because this family can't revolve around your grandfather anymore." I felt my chest tighten. "My grandfather doesn't ask you for anything." "He doesn't have to." Daniel laughed quietly. "Here we go again." I turned toward him. "What?" "You always make yourself the hero." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "I take care of him because somebody has to." "Exactly," Daniel said, "and nobody asked you to." I looked at my father one last time. He looked away. That was my answer. I picked up the suitcase. Then I walked down the hallway to Grandpa's room. He was awake. He was sitting in his chair beside the window, staring at the rain. He turned when I entered. "You're leaving." I stopped. "How did you know?" He smiled faintly. "Your family gets very quiet when they're doing something cruel." My eyes filled with tears. I knelt beside him. "I don't know where I'm going." He reached toward the small wooden drawer beside his chair. His fingers trembled as he opened it. Inside was a sealed envelope. He held it out to me. "What is this?" "Something I should have given you sooner." I looked at the envelope. My name was written across it. Emily. Nothing else. "What's inside?" "Not money." I laughed through my tears. "I wasn't expecting money." "You should be." I looked at him. He became serious. "Listen to me. Your father believes he knows everything about this family. He paused. He doesn't. I didn't understand. Grandpa, what are you talking about? Take the envelope. I did. Don't open it tonight. Why? Because you're angry. He looked directly into my eyes. And when you're angry, you only see what people have done to you. I want you to see what you can do next. I hugged him. He whispered into my ear. Don't come back because they finally realize they need you. I pulled away. Then when should I come back? His expression softened. When you no longer need them to regret losing you. I left the house carrying the suitcase in one hand and the envelope in the other. The rain followed me all the way to my car. I sat behind the steering wheel for nearly 10 minutes without starting the engine. I looked back at the house. The upstairs window was dark. Grandpa's window was still lit. I wanted to run back inside. Instead, I started the car. That was the last night I lived under my family's roof. For the next 2 years, I barely spoke to them. I rented a tiny apartment above a bakery. I worked mornings at a rehabilitation clinic and evenings helping elderly patients who needed private care. It wasn't glamorous. Some nights I came home exhausted enough to sleep in my work clothes. But I was free. And slowly, I began noticing something. The patients I cared for weren't asking for miracles. They wanted someone to remember their names. Someone to listen to the stories they'd told 100 times. Someone to sit beside them when their families were too busy. One elderly man named Harold once grabbed my hand after I helped him eat dinner. You know what the worst part of getting old is? I smiled. What? People stop asking what you want. That sentence stayed with me. I started writing ideas in a notebook. A small private residence. Not a hospital. Not a nursing facility that felt cold and institutional. A home. A place where older people could have dignity. A place where families wouldn't have to choose between caring for someone and surviving financially. I didn't have money. I didn't have investors. I barely had enough savings to pay rent. But I had an idea. And then, one afternoon, Grandpa called me. It was the first time he'd called since I left. My hands shook when I answered. Hello? His voice sounded weak. Emily. I sat down. How are you? Old. I laughed. You've always been old. I've been thinking. That sounds dangerous. He laughed softly. Then his voice changed. I need you to promise me something. What? If your father ever tells you that something belongs to him. He paused. Don't believe him. I frowned. What does that mean? Just promise me. I promised. 3 days later, Grandpa died. I didn't make it to the hospital in time. I arrived 12 minutes after they had pronounced him dead. My mother was standing in the hallway. She looked at me. Then she said the strangest thing. Your grandfather left you something. I froze. What? She looked uncomfortable. I don't know what it is. That night, after the funeral, I finally opened the envelope he had given me. Inside was a single handwritten letter. And one old photograph. The photograph showed Grandpa standing in front of a building I had never seen before. On the back, he had written, Someday, this place will belong to someone who understands what a home is. I turned the photograph over again. There was an address. I searched it online. My heart stopped. It was an abandoned residential property on the edge of town. And according to the public records, my grandfather had owned it for nearly 30 years. But there was something else. Something that made my hands go cold. The property wasn't listed under my father's name. It wasn't listed under my mother's name. It wasn't even part of Grandpa's estate. It was held through a private trust. And I was the only beneficiary. I stared at the document on my laptop. Then I remembered Grandpa's final words. Don't believe him. For the first time, I wondered what my family had known all along, and why they had been so determined to make sure I never stayed in that house. Because the suitcase they gave me that rainy night wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning. And the secret my grandfather had left behind was about to change everything. The next morning, I drove to the address written on the back of the photograph. The property stood at the end of a narrow road surrounded by tall trees and overgrown fields. I expected to find ruins. Instead, I found a beautiful old house. It had faded white walls, a wide porch, and enormous windows covered with dust. A rusted sign near the driveway read, Hawthorne House. I sat in my car for several minutes. This couldn't be real. My grandfather had never mentioned owning a place like this. Not once. I walked toward the front door. It was unlocked. Inside, the air smelled like dust, cedar, and old books. There was furniture covered with white sheets. Paintings lined the hallway. The kitchen still had copper pans hanging above the stove. It didn't look abandoned. It looked paused, as if somebody had simply walked away and expected to return. I found a study at the end of the hallway. A desk stood beneath the window. On it was a small brass key. Beside the key was another envelope. My name was written on it. My hands started shaking. I opened it. Inside was a letter from Grandpa. Emily, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and your father has probably already told you that this property was never meant to be yours. He will be wrong. But don't fight him yet. First, learn why. I read the sentence twice. Then I continued. Your grandmother and I bought Hawthorne House when we were young. We wanted to turn it into a residence for elderly people who had nowhere else to go. We never finished the dream. Your father knew about it. He also knew why we stopped. I looked up. My grandfather had never told me about any of this. The letter continued. Years ago, I trusted someone I shouldn't have trusted. That mistake cost us more than money. It cost us our family. I felt a chill move through me. Then I reached the final paragraph. Your father will tell you this house belongs to him. Do not argue. Ask him one question. Why did he need your signature? I stared at the paper. My father's signature. My signature. What had he needed from me? I suddenly remembered something. When I was 19, my father had brought a stack of documents to the kitchen table. He told me they were related to Grandpa's medical expenses. He had asked me to sign several pages. I hadn't read them. I trusted him. I felt sick. I immediately called my father. He answered after the third ring. Emily? Did Grandpa own Hawthorne House? Silence. It lasted only 2 seconds. But those 2 seconds told me everything. What are you talking about? I found the property. Another pause. Where are you? Why? Emily, listen to me. You shouldn't be there. My heart began pounding. Why not? Because it's complicated. No, it's actually very simple. I looked around the room. Grandpa left me the property. My father's voice became cold. He was confused near the end. He left me a letter. You don't understand what you're dealing with. Then explain it. He didn't. Instead, he said something that made my blood run cold. Your grandfather made mistakes. I tightened my grip on the phone. What kind of mistakes? Stay away from that house. Why? Because your grandfather wasn't the man you think he was. The call ended. I stood completely still. For 24 years, my father had told me Grandpa was stubborn, difficult, old-fashioned, but never dangerous. Now suddenly there was something about him my father didn't want me to discover. I spent the next 3 days searching through every document in Hawthorne House. Behind a bookshelf, I found an old filing cabinet. Inside were property records, bank statements, photographs, and copies of correspondence. Then I found a folder with my father's name on it. The first page contained a loan agreement. The second contained a company registration. The third made my stomach drop. My father had borrowed money against Hawthorne House. Years ago. Without Grandpa's permission. And there was my signature. I stared at it. I remembered signing that document. But the page I had signed had been completely different. Or at least I thought it had been. I kept searching. Then I found something worse. A letter from a lawyer. It stated that my father had attempted to transfer ownership of Hawthorne House into his own company. The transfer had failed. Because Grandpa had placed the property into a protected trust. And the trust named me as the eventual beneficiary. My father hadn't simply hidden the house. He had tried to take it. And apparently my grandfather had spent years making sure he couldn't. I sat on the floor, surrounded by documents. For the first time, I understood why Grandpa had been so careful. He hadn't been keeping a secret from me. He had been protecting me from one. The next morning, I went to see the lawyer listed on the documents. His name was Thomas Reed. He was an older man with silver hair and a habit of tapping his pen against his desk when he was thinking. When I showed him the letter, he didn't look surprised. "You finally found it!" I stared at him. "You knew?" "I knew your grandfather wanted you to find it." "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because he specifically instructed me not to." "Why?" Thomas leaned back. "Because your father would have tried to stop you." I swallowed. He did. Thomas nodded. "Your grandfather knew he would." He opened a file. "Emily, Hawthorne House was never supposed to be an inheritance in the traditional sense." "What does that mean?" "It was supposed to become something." He slid a document across the desk. A charitable housing plan. The original concept was simple. Hawthorne House would provide affordable long-term housing and support for elderly people whose families couldn't care for them. I looked at the plans. It was almost exactly the kind of place I had dreamed about building. I looked at Thomas. "How did Grandpa know?" He smiled sadly. "He knew you better than you think." I looked down. Then Thomas said something I wasn't prepared for. "He also left instructions about your father." My head snapped up. "What instructions?" Thomas folded his hands. "He wanted you to give him one opportunity to tell the truth. And if he doesn't? Then the trust becomes fully activated." "What does that mean?" Thomas looked directly at me. "It means Hawthorne House becomes yours without restriction." I left the office with the documents in my bag. That evening, I drove to my parents' house. My mother opened the door. Her expression changed when she saw me. "Emily." I need to talk to Dad. She stepped aside. He was sitting in the living room. When he saw the folder in my hand, he went pale. I placed it on the coffee table. I know about Hawthorne House. He closed his eyes. My mother looked confused. What is she talking about? My father whispered, nothing. I looked at him. No more lies. He stared at me. I pushed the property documents toward him. You tried to take Grandpa's house. My mother looked at him. Is that true? He didn't answer. I continued. You also had me sign documents when I was 19. My father's face changed. I was trying to save the family. From what? Debt. I laughed bitterly. You put the house at risk to cover your business debt. I was going to pay it back. You didn't. He looked away. I felt tears burning my eyes. Why didn't you tell me? He finally looked at me. Because you would have chosen him. I froze. What? Your grandfather wanted you to have everything. He always favored you. I shook my head. No, he trusted me. My father stood. You don't understand. I understand perfectly. He looked terrified. And that frightened me more than his anger ever could. Because suddenly I realized there was still something he hadn't told me. Something much bigger than the house. Something my grandfather had left behind for me to discover. And whatever it was, my father was desperate to keep it buried. The room went silent. My father stared at the documents as though they had suddenly become a weapon. My mother looked from him to me. What aren't you telling us? She asked. He didn't answer. I pulled the final document from the folder and placed it on the table. This was Grandpa's statement. My father's face lost what little color remained. My mother picked up the page. She read the first few lines. Then she looked at him. You told me the house was sold. My father said nothing. You told me your father had lost it. Still nothing. My mother turned toward me. Emily, I didn't know. I believed her. At least that part. But believing someone had been kept in the dark didn't erase the fact that she had helped throw me out. I looked at my father. Tell me the truth. He lowered himself into the chair. For the first time in my life, he looked old. Not angry. Not powerful. Just tired. I borrowed against the property, he finally said. How much? He didn't answer. How much? 300,000. My mother covered her mouth. I stared at him. And Grandpa stopped you? Yes. Then you blamed him? Yes. Then you blamed me. His eyes filled with tears. I was angry. You were afraid. He looked at me. I continued. You were afraid I'd find out. He nodded. The confession should have felt satisfying. Instead, it made me incredibly sad. Because the man sitting across from me wasn't some stranger who had destroyed my life. He was my father. And I had spent years believing he was the person who would protect me. Why did you make me sign those papers? He looked down. I thought I could fix everything. You used my trust. I know. No, you don't. My voice cracked. You don't know what it feels like to realize that the person you trusted most used your name to protect himself. He didn't respond. My mother began crying. But I couldn't comfort her. Not this time. I stood. I don't want your house. My father looked up. What? I don't want your money. I don't want your apology because you're afraid of losing something. I picked up the documents. I want what Grandpa wanted. My father whispered, What? Hawthorne House. His face tightened. What are you going to do with it? I looked toward the window. Help people. He laughed bitterly. You think you can run a care home? I already do. He stared at me. You have one? Yes. For the first time, I saw something like regret cross his face. Not regret for losing me. Regret for realizing what I had become without him. I walked out. The next morning, I called Thomas. I want to activate the trust. He was silent for a moment. Are you certain? Yes. Then there's one more thing you should know. My stomach tightened. What? Your grandfather didn't leave the property to you because he wanted you to punish your father. I know. He left it to you because he believed you could finish what he couldn't. Thomas sent me the original plans. I opened them that evening. The design was almost identical to the idea I had been carrying in my own notebook for years. Private rooms. A shared kitchen. A garden. Medical support. A common room filled with sunlight. I sat there staring at the pages. My grandfather had been planning this before I was even born. And somehow, without knowing it, I had been walking toward the same dream. I decided to renovate Hawthorne House. Not into a luxury facility. Into a home. The work began in early spring. The old structure needed everything. New plumbing. Electrical repairs. Accessible bathrooms. A modern kitchen. Safety systems. But I refused to erase its history. I kept the original staircase. The old fireplace. The library. And the wide front porch where my grandfather had once imagined elderly residents sitting together in the evening. Rachel came to see the property one afternoon. She walked through the front hall. This place is incredible. I smiled. It's not finished. She looked at me. You know what I mean. I did. For the first time, I wasn't building something because I was trying to prove myself. I was building it because I finally understood myself. Then, 3 weeks before opening, my brother showed up. Daniel stood outside the construction fence with his hands in his pockets. I hadn't seen him in almost 2 years. Can we talk? I hesitated. Then I opened the gate. He stepped inside. He looked around. You actually did it. Yes. He shook his head. I didn't think you would. I know. He looked embarrassed. Mom wants to apologize. I said nothing. Dad, too. Still nothing. Daniel looked toward the house. I was wrong. Those words surprised me. He continued. I thought you were wasting your life taking care of Grandpa. I looked at him. You weren't there. I know. You didn't see what he meant to me. No. He swallowed. But I see it now. I expected him to ask for something. Money. A job. A favor. Instead, he said, I wish I'd been better. I didn't know what to say. So I said the only honest thing. Me too. He nodded. Then he left. I stood alone in the driveway. For years, I had imagined my family coming back into my life. I had imagined dramatic apologies. Tears. Regret. But real life was quieter. People rarely change in the way you imagine. Sometimes they simply become old enough to understand the damage they caused. And sometimes that understanding comes too late. A week later, the city approved Hawthorne House. We scheduled the opening for June 14th. I invited local officials, the neighbors, our staff, the families of the first residents. And, after thinking about it for 2 days, I sent one invitation to my parents. Not because I needed them there. Because Grandpa had always believed people deserved one opportunity to choose differently. Whether they would use that opportunity was no longer my responsibility. The night before the opening, I walked through the empty house alone. Every room was ready. Fresh flowers sat on the tables. The kitchen smelled like cinnamon. Sunlight poured through the tall windows. I stopped in the library. There was an old photograph of Grandpa on the shelf. I touched the frame. I think you were right. My eyes filled with tears. Then I noticed something behind the photograph. A narrow wooden panel. I pulled it away. There was a small compartment hidden inside the wall. And inside that compartment was a second envelope. My name was written on it. But this time, beneath my name, Grandpa had added 5 words. Open this only after you forgive him. I stared at the envelope. My father. My anger. The years I had lost. I wasn't sure I could forgive him. But I knew one thing. Whatever was inside that envelope had been waiting for me. And now there was nowhere left to hide from the truth. I stood in the library with the envelope in my hands for almost 10 minutes. Open this only after you forgive him. Those words felt cruel. Not because my grandfather was wrong. Because he knew exactly how difficult forgiveness would be. I put the envelope in my pocket and walked away. I wasn't ready. The next morning, Hawthorne House opened its doors. The first residents arrived just after 9. An elderly couple came together, holding hands as they slowly crossed the front porch. A retired teacher named Margaret immediately complained that her room was too quiet. A former mechanic named Walter asked whether he could grow tomatoes in the garden. I told him absolutely. By noon, the house no longer felt like an abandoned property. It felt alive. People laughed in the dining room. Someone played an old piano in the sitting room. A nurse helped Margaret arrange photographs beside her bed. And for the first time, Hawthorne House became what my grandfather had imagined. A home. I stood near the entrance watching everyone when I noticed my father. He was outside the gate. Alone. He hadn't come inside. I walked toward him. You came. He nodded. I wasn't sure you'd want me here. I wasn't sure either. He gave a small, sad smile. I deserve that. I looked at him through the gate. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he said, "Your grandfather was right about me." I frowned. What do you mean? He told me once that I was so afraid of losing everything that I would eventually lose the people who mattered. I looked away. He said that to you? Yes. And you didn't listen? No. My father reached into his coat. He pulled out an old photograph. It was faded and bent at the edges. I recognized Grandpa immediately. Beside him stood a much younger version of my father. They were standing in front of Hawthorne House. My father handed it to me. I was 26 here. I looked at the photograph. You knew about his dream. I helped him buy the property. I stared at him. Then why did you try to take it? His eyes filled with shame. Because I thought his dream was impossible. He looked toward the house. I wanted money, status, a bigger business. I thought he was wasting everything on people who couldn't give anything back. I felt my jaw tighten. And me? You were the only person who understood him. He paused. And I hated that. I looked at him. Why? Because every time he praised you, I felt like he was telling me I had failed. The honesty surprised me. Not because it excused him. It didn't. But because, for the first time, I could see the fear underneath his choices. He had spent years competing with a man who never asked him to compete. And when he couldn't win, he took his anger out on everyone around him. I was jealous of you, he admitted. I laughed sadly. You were jealous of me? You were happy with very little. He looked down. I had money, a business, a family, and I was still miserable. I didn't answer. Then he said something that made me think of the envelope. Your grandfather left you something else. My heart stopped. How do you know? He told me. What? He said that if you ever found out what I had done, you would probably hate me. He smiled sadly. And he told me I deserved that. I stared at him. But he also said you might forgive me one day. I looked toward the house. I don't know if I can. You don't have to. Those were the first words my father had ever said that didn't ask something from me. I looked at him. He continued. I didn't come here for the house. Then why did you come? To see what you built. I swallowed. You can come inside. He looked surprised. Are you sure? I nodded. But you're coming as my father. He waited. Not as someone who owns anything here. He nodded. I understand. I opened the gate. He stepped through. Nothing dramatic happened. No music. No tears. No miracle. He simply walked beside me toward the house. And somehow, that quiet walk felt more important than any apology he could have given. That evening, after he left, I returned to the library. I took the envelope from my pocket. I sat beneath the old lamp. Then I opened it. Inside was another letter. My grandfather's handwriting filled the page. My dear Emily, if you've reached this letter, then you've probably discovered everything your father tried to hide. You may be angry. You should be. But anger is useful only while it protects you. After that, it becomes another kind of prison. Your father made terrible choices. I know that better than anyone. But he is still my son. And you are still his daughter. I don't ask you to forget. I don't ask you to trust him. I only ask you not to spend the rest of your life carrying a punishment that was never yours to carry. I stopped reading. Tears rolled down my face. Then I continued. Hawthorne House was never meant to prove that I was right. It was meant to prove that love can survive mistakes. Your father may never become the man you wanted him to be. That isn't your responsibility. Your responsibility is to become the woman you were meant to be. I lowered the letter. For years, I had believed my family had taken something from me. But my grandfather was asking me to put it down. Not for them. For myself. I finished the letter. The final sentence was only 7 words. Don't let their failure become your identity. I closed my eyes. And for the first time since that rainy night, I stopped asking why they had chosen to hurt me. I started asking what I wanted to do with the life I still had. The answer was already standing outside my window. Hawthorne House. Full of light. full of voices, full of people who had been told by life that they were too old, too difficult, too expensive, or too inconvenient. I walked downstairs. Margaret was sitting in the lounge. Walter was arguing with a nurse about tomato seeds. Someone was laughing in the kitchen. I smiled. This was my answer. The following weeks were peaceful. My father began visiting once a week. He never asked about the property. He never asked for money. He simply sat with the residents and listened to their stories. One afternoon, Walter handed him a shovel. "Come on," he said. My father looked confused. "What for?" "You're standing around too much." I watched from the window as my father began digging in the garden. For the first time in years, he looked useful. Not powerful. Not wealthy. Just human. Then, one Friday evening, my mother arrived. She stood outside the gate. She had been silent since the opening. Now she was crying. I walked toward her. She didn't speak immediately. Then she whispered, "I was wrong." Those 3 words were all I had wanted to hear for years. And yet, when they finally came, they didn't heal everything. They simply opened the possibility of something new. She looked toward the house. "Can I come in?" I looked at her. Then at the open gate. And I realized I had a choice. Not the choice my family had once forced upon me. My choice. I stepped aside. Yes. She entered. And behind her, the gate remained open. By the time summer arrived, Hawthorne House had become more than I had ever imagined. The garden was full. Walter's tomatoes had taken over half the vegetable beds. Margaret had somehow convinced 3 other residents that the living room needed fresh curtains. The kitchen was always noisy. And every evening, just before sunset, someone would sit on the porch and watch the sky turn gold over the fields. I often stood there alone after everyone went to bed. Sometimes I still couldn't believe it was real. This was the same property my family had tried to take from my grandfather. The same place I had never known existed. And the same place that had given me a life I never would have imagined when I was sitting in that car 6 years earlier, crying in the rain. But there was one thing I still hadn't completely understood. Why had Grandpa waited so long to tell me? The answer came one afternoon when Thomas Reed visited. He brought a thick folder. "I found something in the original trust records," he said. I opened the folder. Inside was an old letter dated almost 25 years earlier. It was from my grandmother. I had never met her. She had died before I was born. The letter was addressed to Grandpa. I read it slowly. She wrote about Hawthorne House, about their dream, about having a place where elderly people could live without feeling ashamed of needing help. But near the end, she wrote something that made me stop. "If our son ever loses his way, don't destroy him to protect the house. Protect the house so that someday he might find his way back." I closed my eyes. My grandparents hadn't built Hawthorne House to punish my father. They had built it because they believed people could change. Even after disappointment. Even after betrayal. Even after terrible mistakes. I finally understood why Grandpa had wanted me to forgive him. Not because my father deserved an easy pardon. Because my grandfather didn't want hatred to become the final inheritance passed from one generation to another. That evening, I found my father sitting on the porch with Walter. They were arguing about tomatoes. I smiled. My father noticed me. "Your grandfather was right about the garden." I laughed. He would be shocked. He'd probably tell me I'm doing it wrong. He would. My father looked toward the fields. Then he said quietly, "I'm sorry." I sat beside him. This time, I didn't walk away. "I know." "No," he said, "I don't think you do." He looked at his hands. "I am sorry for the house. I'm sorry for the documents. I'm sorry for making you think you weren't wanted." I swallowed. "And I'm sorry I didn't protect you when your mother asked you to leave." That was the apology I had been waiting for. Not excuses. Not explanations. Recognition. I looked at him. "I can't pretend none of it happened." "I know. And I can't promise everything will go back to the way it was." "I don't want that." I looked at him. He smiled faintly. "I'd rather build something new." For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then I said, "You can start by helping Walter with those tomatoes." He laughed. "I was hoping you'd say something easier." Too late. The next morning, my mother came to Hawthorne House. She didn't bring excuses. She brought a box. Inside were old family photographs. Pictures of Grandpa. Pictures of me as a child. Pictures of my parents when they were young. She placed the box on the table. "I kept these," she said. I looked at her. "Why?" "Because even when I was angry, I knew they mattered." I didn't forgive her immediately. But I listened. She told me that she had been afraid. Afraid of losing control. Afraid of my grandfather's influence over the family. Afraid that if I became independent, she would no longer know where she fit. None of it excused what she had done. But for the first time, I understood that people can hurt others while fighting battles nobody else can see. We didn't become close overnight. We didn't suddenly become a perfect family. Real life doesn't work that way. But we began again. Slowly. Carefully. Honestly. Months passed. Hawthorne House grew. We added another wing. Then a rehabilitation room. Then a small library. The waiting list grew longer. People began traveling from neighboring towns to ask about admission. And one evening, a reporter asked me why I had built the place. I looked through the window at the residents laughing around the dining table. Then I answered honestly. Because someone once taught me that needing help doesn't make you worthless. The reporter asked who. I smiled. My grandfather. She asked what he had taught me. I thought about the envelope. The suitcase. The rain. The years of silence. And the final letter. I said, "He taught me that losing a home doesn't mean losing yourself." That night, after the interview, I walked to the porch. My father was there. My mother was sitting beside him. They were watching Walter's granddaughter help him water the garden. I stood behind them for a moment. Then my father looked over his shoulder. "You coming?" I smiled. Yes. I sat beside them. The three of us watched the sunset. It wasn't perfect. Maybe it never would be. But it was peaceful. And sometimes peace is better than perfection. Years earlier, my family had believed they were sending me away. They thought I would return when I ran out of options. They thought they were taking away my security. Instead, they pushed me toward a life I never would have had the courage to build on my own. I used to think that was the cruelest thing they had ever done to me. Now I see it differently. They didn't give me my future. I built it. They didn't give me my strength. I discovered it. And they certainly didn't give me a home. I built one. For myself. For my grandfather's memory. And for every person who had ever been made to feel like they were too old, too difficult, too weak, or too inconvenient to deserve a place at the table. The old gate at Hawthorne House stayed open every day. Not because everyone deserved unlimited access to my life, but because I finally understood the difference between an open heart and an unlocked door. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean pretending the hurt never happened. And it doesn't mean allowing the same people to hurt you again. Sometimes forgiveness simply means refusing to let yesterday control tomorrow. My grandfather once told me not to waste my life, making everyone else comfortable. For years, I thought he was telling me to become independent. He was telling me something much bigger. He was telling me to become myself. And that is exactly what I did. The girl who left that house carrying a suitcase believed she had been abandoned. The woman standing on the porch years later knew the truth. She had not been abandoned. She had been released. And sometimes, the door that closes behind you is not the door to your life ending. It's the door to the life you were finally brave enough to build.